Welcome to Chapter 17 of our Civil War unit, The Tide Turns. Chancellorsville. On April 27, 1863, Union General Joseph Hooker led an army of 130,000 men to once again attempt to take Richmond. They were met by a significantly smaller Confederate force led by Lee and Jackson. The fighting primarily occurred near Chancellorsville, Virginia, and lasted from April 30th until May 6th. Lee made the gutsy move of dividing his already small force, but this ultimately paid off, and the Union Army was forced to retreat after 7 days of battle. Victory came with a price, however, with General Stonewall Jackson's death from friendly fire. This was the second bloodiest battle of the Civil War. This also marked the Confederacy's last major victory of the Civil War. Vicksburg. While Lee was winning in the East, Grant was having his own success in the West. Vicksburg, Mississippi was one of the last remaining Confederate strongholds along the Mississippi River. Preliminary operations against Vicksburg occurred between December 1862 and March 1863 in preparation for a final assault. On April 29, 1863, Grant led forces against the rebels at Vicksburg, and after several battles, the siege of the stronghold itself began 3 weeks later. On July 4, 1863, Grant successfully defeated and captured all the Confederate forces, and the Union now controlled the entirety of the Mississippi River. In response, Lee decided to launch a campaign in Pennsylvania to threaten both Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. George Meade. He lived from 1815 until 1872. Before the Civil War, he fought in the Seminole Wars and the Mexican-American War. Leading up to Gettysburg, he had fought in the Peninsula Campaign, Antietam, Fredericksburg, and Chancellorsville. While the Union was defeated at the Battle of Fredericksburg, Meade proved his abilities as an officer, as he was appointed commander of the Army of the Potomac 3 days before the Battle of Gettysburg. He is best known for his leadership in the Union's victory at the Battle of Gettysburg, defeating Lee in 3 days and forcing him to retreat. After the war, he commanded several important departments during Reconstruction. George Pickett. He lived from 1825 until 1875. He graduated from West Point and served in the Mexican-American War. Even though he lived in Oregon at the beginning of the Civil War and hated slavery, Pickett returned to his native Virginia to serve his state and his fellow Virginians. Pickett was easily recognized for his elaborate uniform and his horse, Old Black. He was one of 3 generals that led 12,500 Confederate soldiers on the final day of Gettysburg in what was called Pickett's Charge. This charge resulted in heavy Confederate casualties, and it ultimately was the deciding factor of the Battle of Gettysburg in favor of the Union. Gettysburg Day 1. On July 1st, 1863, General Lee's army of 71,000 men arrived in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, meeting General Meade's army of 100,000 men. Anticipating that Lee would enter from the west, Meade's men took the high ground on Seminary Ridge. Isolated units engaged throughout the day until a large portion of both armies were engaged in battle. By the end of the day, Union forces had to retreat up to Cemetery Hill, giving them a tactical advantage in the days to come. While Day 1 had the smallest number of troops involved, since both Meade's and Lee's armies had not all arrived by Day 1, it was still one of the larger fights of the Civil War. Gettysburg Day 2. During the night, the remaining soldiers for both Lee and Meade arrived. The Union Army formed a line that looked like a fishhook, extending over 2 miles long around Cemetery Hill. Lee planned on surprising the Union's left flank from behind with General Longstreet's division of troops. However, this plan was based on faulty intelligence, and Longstreet marched right at the Union's left flank, losing most of his men and their reinforcements. By 7 o'clock that night, Lee changed his strategy and sent forces against the Union's right flank, but they too were turned back. While the Union was successful in pushing back Lee's assaults, both sides suffered heavy losses. Gettysburg Day 3. Lee intended to use the same strategy he had used the day before, but this was interrupted by heavy artillery bombardment by Union cannons. The Confederates returned fire, but they failed to break the Union line. The Union then purposely did not return fire at first, and when they did, they only fired a portion of their cannons, hoping to trick Lee into thinking they were out of ammunition. The ruse worked, and at 3 p.m., General George Pickett led a charge of 12,500 men across open field towards the Union line. The Union responded with full force of artillery, killing many of the charging Confederates. While some rebels were able to cross the line, they were ultimately driven back and Lee was forced to retreat. Like McClellan before him, Meade failed to pursue Lee, much to the frustration of Lincoln. This marked the turning point of the war in favor of the Union. It also marked the final time Confederate forces would invade the North. Edward Everett. He lived from 1794 until 1865. Everett was a pastor's son and graduated from Harvard to become a pastor before taking a teaching position at Harvard. He later served in various political offices, including Congressman from Massachusetts, Senator from Massachusetts, Secretary of State, Ambassador to the United Kingdom, and Governor of Massachusetts. He was best known for his skills as an orator, aka a public speaker. Several months after the Battle of Gettysburg, Everett was invited to town for a ceremony honoring those who had died, where he gave a rousing 2-hour speech. The Edward Everett Oratory Contest is now held each year at Hillsdale College, and the winner with the best speech is awarded a $3,000 scholarship. The Gettysburg Address. While Everett was the primary attraction at the ceremony, it is not his 2-hour speech that is remembered. After Everett's speech, President Lincoln was called forth to make some remarks. Lincoln gave a short 2-minute speech that would become the most famous speech in American history. While barely 1 page long, Lincoln asked America to appeal to the past as a guide, remember the present sacrifices that had been made, and to work towards a future worthy of these sacrifices. Because the speech was so short, the only photograph of Lincoln taken during the speech is of him sitting down once he had finished. Summary. 1863 marked the turning point of the war in favor of the Union. Victories at Vicksburg and Gettysburg gave the North more confidence and higher morale. Please make sure you have all the terms in the summary written down in your notes.